The rain was coming down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, turning the streets of Manhattan into rivers of gray water. Wellington sat in the back of his black Mercedes, his fingers drumming impatiently on the leather seat as traffic crawled along Fifth Avenue. He had just closed a deal worth $40 million, and all he wanted was to get home, pour himself a glass of scotch, and relax in the silence of his penthouse. Was a man who had everything. At 42 years old, he owned 3 companies, had investments in 12 countries, and lived in one of the most expensive buildings in New York City. His tailored suits cost more than most people made in a month. His watch alone could pay for a small house. People called him a genius, a visionary, a self-made billionaire who had turned a small tech startup into an empire. But it had not always been this way. He had grown up in a small town in Ohio, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher. He remembered what it was like to wear the same pair of shoes until they had holes in them. He remembered eating cereal for dinner because there was nothing else in the house. Those memories had made him hungry for success, and he had chased it with everything he had. The car finally pulled up to his building and stepped out into the rain. The doorman rushed forward with an umbrella but waved him off. He was already soaked, and he did not care. He walked through the lobby with long strides, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. The security guard nodded at him and gave a brief nod back before stepping into the private elevator that went directly to his penthouse on the 45th floor. The elevator doors opened and stepped into his home. The penthouse was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Modern art hung on the walls, and everything was decorated in shades of black, white, and gray. It was cold and perfect, just the way he liked it. But something was different today. The lights in the living room were on and could hear movement coming from the kitchen. He frowned. His housekeeper, Mrs., only came on Thursdays. It was Tuesday. No one else had access to his home except for his personal assistant, and she would never come here without calling first. Set his briefcase down and walked toward the kitchen. As he got closer, he could smell something cooking. It was a rich, savory smell that reminded him of his childhood. Suddenly, a woman appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a simple black dress with a white apron, and she was carrying a wooden spoon. She looked to be in her late 50s, with dark skin and graying hair pulled back into a neat bun. Her face was kind but firm, with lines around her eyes that spoke of a life filled with both laughter and struggle. The woman looked at and smiled. It was a warm smile, the kind that reached her eyes. But there was also something cautious in her expression, as if she was measuring him. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. I hope you like pot roast." Stared at her in complete confusion. Who was this woman? Why was she in his home? And why was she acting as if she belonged here? "Excuse me," said his voice sharp. "Who are you and what are you doing in my house?" The woman did not seem bothered by his tone. She simply wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him with that same steady gaze. "My name is," she said. "I'm your new housekeeper. Didn't your assistant tell you?" Felt his jaw tighten. His assistant, Jennifer, had mentioned something about hearing someone new, but he had been too busy to pay attention. He had simply told her to handle it, but this was not what he had expected. Mrs. had been quiet and invisible, exactly the way he liked his staff to be. This woman seemed different. She had a presence that filled the room. "I don't remember approving this," said coldly. "Mrs. has worked for me for 5 years. Why would I need someone new?" Tilted her head slightly, and there was something knowing in her expression. "Mrs.'s daughter had a baby. She moved to California to help take care of her. She recommended me. Said you needed someone who could keep this big house running smoothly." Felt a flash of irritation. Mrs. had not told him she was leaving. Then again, he realized he had not asked. In the past year, he had barely spoken to her except to leave notes about what needed to be done. "Fine," said, though his voice was still cold. "But I have very specific rules. I don't like small talk. I don't want anyone in my home when I'm here unless absolutely necessary, and I expect complete discretion. What happens in this house stays in this house. Is that clear?" Looked at him for a long moment and had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing right through him. But then she simply nodded. "Crystal clear, Mr. Wellington," she said. "But the pot roast is going to burn if I don't get back to it. I'll have everything ready for you shortly." She turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving standing in his own home feeling oddly off balance. He was not used to people speaking to him that way. Most people were either intimidated by him or trying to impress him. But this woman seemed to be neither. She treated him like he was just another person and was not sure how he felt about that. He went to his bedroom and changed out of his wet suit. When he came back out, the dining table had been set with simple elegance. There was a white tablecloth, silver cutlery, and a single candle in the center, appeared with a plate of pot roast, roasted vegetables, and mashed potatoes. The smell was incredible. "I wasn't expecting anyone to cook for me," said as he sat down. "Mrs. never cooked." "I know," said as she poured him a glass of water. "She told me. Said you mostly ate takeout or those fancy restaurant meals. Thought you might enjoy a home-cooked meal for once." Picked up his fork and took a bite. The moment the food touched his tongue, he was transported back to his childhood. It tasted exactly like the meals his mother used to make on Sundays, back when his family would gather around their small kitchen table and talk about their week. For a moment, felt something he had not felt in years. He felt a sense of warmth, of home. But he pushed the feeling away quickly. He did not have time for nostalgia. That part of his life was over. He had built something better, something bigger. "It's good," said simply, and he continued eating in silence. Did not try to make conversation. She simply cleared the kitchen and then came back to tell him that she had prepared coffee and left it in the pot if he wanted any. Then she gathered her coat and purse. "I'll be here tomorrow morning at 8, she said. "Is there anything special you need?" "No," said without looking up. "Just keep the place clean." Nodded and left, sat at the table alone, finishing his meal in the silence of his enormous penthouse. But for some reason, the silence felt heavier than usual. The walls seemed a little emptier, and when he looked at the plate in front of him, he thought about his mother again and wondered when he had last called her. The next morning woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon. He stumbled out of bed, confused. It was only 6:30 in the morning. Had said she would be here at 8. He walked into the kitchen and found her already working, humming softly to herself as she prepared breakfast. "You're early," said, his voice still rough from sleep. Looked up and smiled. "Thought you might want breakfast before you head to the office. I noticed you usually skip it." Frowned. "How would you know that?" "Mrs. told me," said simply. "Said you work too hard and don't take care of yourself properly." Felt a surge of irritation. He did not need anyone taking care of him. He was a grown man, a billionaire. He could take care of himself just fine. "I don't need breakfast," said shortly, "and I prefer to be alone in the mornings." Set down the spatula and looked at him directly. There was no anger in her eyes, but there was a firmness that made pause. "Mr. Wellington," she said calmly, "I was hired to take care of this house and to make sure you have what you need. Part of that is making sure you eat properly. Now you can refuse breakfast if you want. That's your choice. But I'm going to make it anyway, and it'll be waiting for you if you change your mind." She turned back to the stove and stood there feeling frustrated and confused. No one spoke to him like that. No one refused to follow his instructions. But there was something about calm confidence that made it impossible to argue with her. She was not being rude or disrespectful. She was simply stating a fact. Went back to his bedroom, showered, and got dressed. When he came back out, there was a plate of eggs, bacon, toast, and fresh fruit waiting for him at the dining table. The coffee was hot and perfectly made. Looked at the food and then at who was wiping down the kitchen counter. He sat down and ate, and as much as he hated to admit it, the food made him feel better. He had more energy than usual. His mind felt clearer. By the time he finished, he was almost grateful, though he would never say it out loud. "Thank you," said as he stood to leave. The words felt strange in his mouth. He could not remember the last time he had thanked someone for something so simple. Looked at him and smiled. "You're welcome, Mr. Wellington. Have a good day." Left for the office, but throughout the day he found himself thinking about. There was something about her that bothered him, but he could not quite figure out what it was. She was doing her job well, maybe even too well. But there was also a sense that she saw him in a way that made him uncomfortable. She looked at him like he was a person, not just a boss, and was not used to that. Over the next few weeks became a constant presence in his life. She was always there when he came home, always had meals prepared, always kept the house spotless. But she also started doing little things that had not asked for. She would leave notes on his desk reminding him of important meetings. She would make sure his favorite coffee was always stocked. She even started leaving fresh flowers in the living room, which had never cared about before but now found oddly comforting. But the more time passed, the more felt his walls going up. He did not want to get close to anyone. He had learned long ago that people always wanted something from him. They wanted his money, his connections, his influence. No one cared about the person. They only cared about the billionaire. One evening came home after a particularly difficult day. A deal had fallen through, and he had lost millions of dollars. He was in a foul mood, and all he wanted was to be left alone. But when he walked into the penthouse was there, and she had a concerned look on her face. "Bad day?" she asked gently. "I don't want to talk about it," snapped. "Just leave me alone." Did not flinch, she simply nodded. "All right, but I made your favorite soup. It's on the stove if you get hungry." She gathered her things and started to leave. But as she reached the door, she paused and turned back to. "Mr. Wellington," she said softly, "I know you don't want to hear this, but you're working yourself to death. And for what? All this money, all this success. It doesn't mean much if you have no one to share it with." Felt anger surge through him. "You don't know anything about me," he said harshly. "You're just the housekeeper. Do your job and stay out of my personal life." The words hung in the air, cruel and cutting. Saw something flicker in his eyes, a brief flash of hurt. But then she straightened her shoulders and looked at him with that same calm dignity she always had. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm just the housekeeper. I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Wellington." The next morning woke up with a headache and a guilty feeling in his chest. He had barely slept, thinking about what he had said too. She had only been trying to help, and he had thrown her kindness back in her face. He was not used to feeling guilty. In his world, weakness was punished, and showing emotion was a liability, but was not part of his business world. She was just a woman trying to do her job, and he had treated her terribly. When walked into the kitchen, was already there. She greeted him with the same polite smile she always had, but could sense a difference. There was a distance now, a wall that had not been there before. She served him breakfast without any of the small comments she usually made. She did not ask how he slept. She did not remind him to take his vitamins. She simply did her job and nothing more. Ate in uncomfortable silence. He wanted to apologize, but the words stuck in his throat. He had built his entire life on being strong, on never admitting when he was wrong. But sitting there in his enormous penthouse, eating a breakfast prepared by a woman he had hurt, felt small. He said finally, his voice rough, "About last night, I was out of line. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way." Paused in her work and looked at him. Her expression was unreadable. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Wellington," she said quietly. "I understand you had a difficult day." "That's no excuse," said, surprising himself. "You were only trying to help, and you were right. I do work too much. I'm not used to people caring about that." Studied him for a long moment and felt exposed under her gaze. Then she nodded slowly. "I accept your apology," she said. "But Mr. Wellington, let me be clear about something. I'm not here just to clean and cook. Mrs. told me you needed someone who wasn't afraid of you, someone who would treat you like a human being, not just a paycheck. That's why she recommended me." Felt something shift inside him. "Why would you want a job like that?" he asked. "Most people would be happy to just do the work and collect the money." Smiled, and there was a sadness in it. "Because I've seen what happens to people who have everything but nothing at the same time," she said. "My late husband was like that. He worked himself to death trying to build something, and by the time he realized what he'd lost, it was too late. I don't want to see that happen to anyone else." The words hit harder than he expected. He looked down at his plate, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry about your husband," he said quietly. "Thank you," said. "He was a good man, stubborn as a mule, but good. Reminds me of someone else I know." Despite himself, felt the corner of his mouth twitch. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. Saw it, and her own smile widened. "There," she said. "That's better. You look more human when you're not scowling all the time." Shook his head, but he felt something ease in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, having a round was not such a bad thing after all. The weeks passed, and a strange routine developed between and she would be there in the mornings when he woke up, and she would still be there when he came home at night. She cooked meals that reminded him of home. She kept the penthouse warm and welcoming, and slowly, very slowly, found himself talking to her. At first, it was just small things. He would mention a meeting that went well or a problem he was dealing with at work. Would listen without judgment, sometimes offering a perspective he had not considered. She had a way of cutting through all the complexity and getting to the heart of the matter. It was refreshing to talk to someone who did not want anything from him except honest conversation. But still kept his distance. He did not share anything too personal. He did not talk about his family or his past. There was still a wall between them and intended to keep it there. One Saturday afternoon was working from home when his phone rang. He looked at the screen and saw his mother's name. His stomach tightened. He had not spoken to his mother in over 3 months. He had been meaning to call, but there was always something more urgent, something more important. Let the call go to voicemail. He told himself he would call her back later when he had more time. But he knew it was a lie. He always said he would call later, and later never came. Walked into the study to bring him coffee. She noticed the phone on the desk and the missed call notification on the screen. She did not say anything, but saw the look in her eyes. It was the same look his mother used to give him when he was a child, and she knew he was not telling the truth. "What?" said defensively. "Nothing," said, setting down the coffee. "It's not my business." "That's right," said, "it's not." Turned to leave, but then she paused at the door. "You know," she said softly, "the biggest regret of my life is that I was working a double shift the night my husband had his heart attack. I kept telling myself I would spend more time with him later, but later never came. One day you look up and the people you love are gone and all you have left are regrets." She left before could respond. He sat there staring at his phone, his words echoing in his mind. He thought about his mother, alone in that small house in Ohio. He thought about all the times he had promised to visit and never did. He thought about the last time he had told her he loved her, and he could not even remember when that was. Picked up his phone and stared at it for a long time. Then he set it back down. He was not ready, not yet. That evening came home to find in the kitchen, but something was different. She was moving slower than usual, and her face looked tired. When she set his plate down, noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. Said concerned, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," said, but her voice lacked its usual strength. "Just a little tired, that's all." "Have you eaten?" asked. Paused, "I'll eat when I get home." "Sit down," said, pulling out a chair. "You made enough food for an army as usual. Eat with me." Looked surprised, but she did not argue. She fixed herself a plate and sat down across from. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and then noticed rubbing her wrist. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Old arthritis," said with a small smile. "It acts up when the weather changes, nothing serious." Frowned, "Have you seen a doctor about it?" "Can't afford the specialist," admitted. "The regular doctor gave me some cream, but it only helps a little. It's fine, Mr. Wellington, I've dealt with worse." Felt something tighten in his chest. Here was this woman who took care of him, who made sure he ate and rested, and she was in pain but could not afford proper treatment. It seemed fundamentally wrong. "I'll take care of it," said firmly. "Give me the name of your doctor. I'll make sure you see the best specialist in the city." His eyes widened. "Mr. Wellington, I can't let you do that. It's too expensive." "I'm not asking for permission," said. "You work for me, which means you get health benefits. I should have set that up from the beginning. Consider it done." Looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's very kind of you." Felt uncomfortable with her gratitude. He cleared his throat and looked away. "It's just good business," he said gruffly. "Can't have my housekeeper unable to work." But they both knew it was more than that. Something had shifted between them. The wall had built was starting to crack. The following week went to see the specialist had arranged. The doctor prescribed proper medication and therapy, and within days was moving easier with less pain. She thanked every day, and every time she did, felt that same uncomfortable warmth in his chest. One evening, came home to find sitting at the kitchen table, looking at old photographs. She quickly tried to put them away when she saw him, but stopped her. "What are those?" he asked, genuinely curious. Hesitated, then slowly pulled out the photos. "Pictures of my family," she said. "I was just looking at them during my break." Sat down and looked at the photographs. There was much younger standing next to a tall man with a warm smile. There were pictures of children, family gatherings. "That's your husband?" asked, pointing to the man. Nodded, her eyes soft with memory. "James, he died 5 years ago, heart attack like I told you. He was only 62. "I'm sorry," said, and he meant it. Showed him more pictures, telling him stories about her 3 children and 7. Her face lit up when she talked about them and found himself actually interested in what she was saying. He asked questions and answered them, sharing her life with him in a way that felt natural and easy. "What about you, Mr. Wellington?" asked gently. "Do you have any family?" Stiffened. "My parents are alive," he said shortly. "I don't see them much." "That's a shame," said, and there was no judgment in her voice, only sadness. "Family is everything." Wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that family was overrated, that he had built his life on his own and did not need anyone. But the words died in his throat. Because sitting there, looking at photographs, seeing the love and joy in every picture, realized something he had been avoiding for years. He was lonely. He had money, power, success, everything he had ever thought he wanted. But he had no one to share it with. He had no one who cared if he came home at night. No one who asked how his day was. No one who looked at him the way looked at her family in those photographs. "I should let you finish your work," said abruptly, standing up. He could not handle these feelings, not now. Looked at him with understanding in her eyes. "All right, Mr. Wellington," she said softly, "but if you ever want to talk, I'm a good listener." Nodded and walked away, but words stayed with him. That night, lying in his enormous bed in his enormous penthouse, stared at the ceiling and wondered when his life had become so empty. The next morning was a Sunday and did not have to go to the office. Was not scheduled to work on Sundays, but when woke up, he found a note on the kitchen counter. It was in neat handwriting. "Mr. Wellington, I left some food in the fridge for you. Just heat it up. Take care of yourself today. Do something that makes you happy. Life is too short to work all the time." Stood in his kitchen holding the note, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt cared for, not because of his money or his power, but because someone genuinely wanted him to be happy. On impulse, picked up his phone and called his mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice surprised and happy. "Is that really you?" "Hi, Mom," said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know it's been a while, I'm sorry. I've been busy, but that's no excuse. How are you?" Monday morning came and found himself actually looking forward to seeing. When he walked into the kitchen, she was there as always, preparing breakfast with that quiet efficiency he had come to appreciate. But there was something different about her today. She seemed lighter somehow, more at peace. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," said with a warm smile. "How was your Sunday?" "It was good," said, and he realized he meant it. "I called my mother, we talked for a long time." His face lit up with genuine joy. "That's wonderful, I'm so glad to hear that. How is she doing?" "She's good," said, sitting down at the table. "Getting older but still sharp as ever. She wants me to visit soon." "You should," said, setting down his breakfast. "Nothing in your schedule is more important than that." Nodded, and they fell into an easy conversation. For the first time since had started working for him, found himself actually enjoying these morning talks. He told her about his conversation with his mother, about memories from his childhood that he had not thought about in years. Listened with genuine interest, asking questions and sharing her own stories. Over the next few weeks, something beautiful began to happen. Started leaving work earlier. He began looking forward to coming home, to the smell of cooking and the warmth of her presence. They would eat dinner together and would tell her about his day. Would offer her perspective, sometimes agreeing with him, sometimes challenging him, but always with respect and wisdom. Learned that had worked as a nurse for 30 years before retiring. She had raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband died, putting all of them through college with her own hard work. She had seen the worst of humanity in the hospital emergency rooms, but somehow she had kept her faith in people, her belief that goodness existed in the world. "How do you stay so positive?" asked her one evening. "After everything you've been through." Smiled, "Because I choose to focus on the good," she said simply. "Yes, I've seen terrible things, I've lost people I loved, I've struggled and suffered, but I've also seen miracles, I've seen strangers help each other, I've seen love triumph over hate, and I've learned that bitterness only hurts the person holding on to it, so I choose joy even when it's hard." Thought about her words long after had gone home. He had spent so many years being angry, being driven by a need to prove himself. But what had it gotten him? Money, yes. Success, absolutely. But happiness, peace, those had always seemed just out of reach. One Thursday afternoon, left the office early. He had been thinking about photographs, about the love and joy in her family, and he realized he wanted that. He wanted connection. He wanted to rebuild the bridges he had burned. When arrived home, he heard voices coming from the living room. He walked in to find sitting on the couch with a young woman who was clearly her daughter. They had the same eyes, the same warm smile. A little boy, maybe 4 years old, was playing with toy cars on the floor. Looked up in surprise. "Mr. Wellington, I didn't expect you home so early. I hope you don't mind. My daughter's car broke down nearby, and I told her to wait here until the tow truck came. We'll be out of your way in just a minute." The little boy looked up with wide, curious eyes. Are you the man Grandma works for? He asked in that blunt way children have. I am, said, and he found himself smiling. What's your name? I'm Joshua, the boy said proudly. I'm 4.5 years old. 4.5, repeated seriously. That's very grown up. His daughter stood up looking embarrassed. I'm so sorry to intrude, Mr. Wellington. Im's daughter. We really won't be long. But surprised them all, including himself. Please, don't rush. Actually, if you haven't had lunch, there's plenty of food in the kitchen. Always makes enough to feed an army. Looked at him with something like wonder in her eyes. Seemed uncertain, but the little boy was already tugging on his mother's hand. Please, Mommy, I'm hungry, Joshua said. Looked at who nodded. Really, it's fine, I insist. They ended up having lunch together, all four of them sitting around's dining table. It was strange at first. Had never had guests in his penthouse outside of business meetings, but as they ate and talked, something wonderful happened. Relaxed. He found himself laughing at Joshua's stories about preschool. He listened to talk about her work as a teacher, and he watched, seeing how she lit up when she was surrounded by family. For a few hours, cold, perfect penthouse felt like a home. And when they finally left, after the tow truck had come and gone, stood in his living room and felt the silence return. But this time, the silence felt different. It felt lonely in a way it never had before. Thank you for being so kind to my family, said as she cleaned up. That meant a lot to them and to me. They're wonderful, said honestly. Your daughter is doing a great job with Joshua. You should be proud. I am, said softly. They're my whole world. Nodded, and then, without really thinking about it, he said something he had been holding back for weeks. Can I ask you something personal? Of course, said, giving him her full attention. Why do you work here? Asked. You could spend more time with you could be retired, enjoying your life. Why do you spend your days taking care of someone like me? Was quiet for a moment and worried he had offended her. But then she spoke, and her words cut straight to his heart. Because I see you, Mr. Wellington, she said gently. I see a man who is drowning in success but dying of loneliness. I see someone who built walls so high to protect himself that now he can't find his way out. And I believe that everyone deserves to be cared for no matter how much money they have or how high their walls are. You remind me of my husband. He pushed everyone away too until it was too late. I couldn't save him, but maybe I can help you before you end up in the same place. Felt his throat tighten. No one had ever spoken to him with such honesty, such compassion. He wanted to argue, to deny what she was saying. But he could not because it was true. Every word of it was true. I don't know how to let people in, admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to trust that they won't hurt me or use me. I know, said, and she reached out and gently touched his hand. It was the first time she had ever touched him and felt the warmth of human connection flow through him. But you're already starting. You called your mother. You were kind to my family. These are small steps, but they matter. Every journey begins with a single step. Looked down its hand on his, weathered and strong from years of work. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not pull away. He let himself be comforted. He let himself be seen. That night could not sleep. His mind was racing with thoughts and feelings he had suppressed for years. He thought about his childhood, about the day his father had lost his job and how scared they had all been. He thought about working his way through college, sleeping in his car some nights because he could not afford an apartment. He thought about the first million he made and how he had thought that money would finally make him feel safe. But it had not. No amount of money had ever made that fear go away, so he had kept chasing more, thinking that maybe the next deal, the next billion, would finally be enough. But it never was, and in the process of building his empire, he had lost himself. Got out of bed and walked to his office. He opened his safe and pulled out an old shoebox he had not looked at in years. Inside were photographs from his childhood. His mother young and smiling, his father strong and proud, as a little boy gap-toothed and happy. There was a picture of his whole family at his high school graduation, all of them beaming with pride. When had he stopped being that boy? When had he become this cold, isolated man? The next morning, made a decision. When arrived, he was waiting for her in the kitchen with a cup of coffee already made. Good morning, said. I have something I want to ask you. Looked surprised but pleased. What is it, Mr. Wellington? I want you to help me plan a trip home, said. To Ohio, to see my parents. I haven't been back in almost 5 years, and I think it's time. Past time, actually. His face broke into the biggest smile had ever seen on her. Oh, Mr. Wellington, that's wonderful. They're going to be so happy. When do you want to go? Next weekend, said. If you can help me figure out what to do, I've forgotten how to just be a son. I've forgotten how to be normal. Sat down across from him, and together they began to plan. She suggested things he could bring for his parents, places he could take them, ways he could show them he cared. And as they talked, felt something shift inside him. He felt hope. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he could find his way back to the person he used to be. The week passed quickly, and before knew it, he was on a plane to Ohio. Had helped him pick out gifts for his parents, thoughtful things that showed he had been paying attention all these years, even if he had not been present. She had even suggested he make a reservation at his parents' favorite restaurant, the little Italian place downtown where they had celebrated every birthday and anniversary. Once plane landed in Cleveland, he felt nervous in a way he never felt in business meetings. His hands were actually shaking as he picked up his rental car. But he drove to his, watching as the city gave way to suburbs and then to the small town where he had grown up. Everything looked smaller than he remembered. The streets were narrower. The houses were more modest. But as he pulled up to his childhood home, a tiny ranch house with a yard full of flowers his mother loved, felt something break open inside him. His mother must have been watching for him because the front door flew open before he even got out of the car. She came running down the walk, tears streaming down her face. Met her halfway, and when she threw her arms around him, he held her tight and let himself cry for the first time in years. "My boy," his mother whispered. "My beautiful boy, you came home." "I'm sorry, Mom," said through his tears. "I'm so sorry I stayed away so long." His father came out more slowly, trying to hide his own emotion. But when reached for him, his father's face crumpled, and they embraced like they had when was a child and his father had been his hero. They spent the weekend together, and it was one of the best weekends of his life. They ate his mother's cooking, which somehow tasted even better than he remembered. They looked through old photo albums, laughing at pictures of as a baby, as a teenager, as a young man full of dreams. They talked about everything, and nothing's father had aged more than expected. His hair was completely white now, and he moved more slowly than he used to. But his eyes were still sharp, still filled with the same quiet strength remembered from childhood. They sat on the back porch Sunday morning, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the neighborhood. "Your mother was so worried about you," his father said quietly. "She would watch your interviews on television and tell me how tired you looked, how alone." Felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, Dad. I got so caught up in building the business, in proving that I could make it. I lost sight of what really mattered." His father nodded slowly. "I understand that drive, son. I felt it too when I was working at the factory. I wanted to give you and your mother everything. But I learned something when I lost that job, when we had nothing. I learned that the people who love you don't care about what you have. They just want you." The simple truth of those words hit hard. All these years, he had been trying to prove his worth through his success. But his parents had always loved him, not for what he accomplished, but for who he was. "There's someone I want you to meet," said. "Her name is, she's my housekeeper, but she's become much more than that. She's the one who convinced me to come home. She's been teaching me what really matters in life." His father smiled. "She sounds like a wise woman. Your mother and I would love to meet her someday." "I'll make that happen," promised, and he meant it. When returned to New York on Monday evening, he felt different. The city looked the same, his building looked the same, but something inside him had shifted. He no longer felt the desperate need to prove himself. He no longer felt like he had to be perfect and untouchable. He felt human again. Was waiting for him when he got home. She had prepared his favorite meal, and when she saw his face, she smiled with genuine happiness. "How was your trip?" she asked. "It was perfect," said, and his voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for pushing me to go. You were right. It was exactly what I needed." "I'm so glad," said warmly. "Tell me all about it." They sat together at the dining table and told her everything. He showed her pictures on his phone of his parents, of his childhood home, of the restaurant where they had all laughed until their sides hurt, and listened with the same care and attention she always gave him, celebrating his joy as if it were her own. "I've been thinking," said when he finished his story. "I want to change some things. I want to work less, spend more time with the people who matter. I want to figure out who Wellington really is beyond the money and the business." "That's a beautiful goal," said, "and I think you're already well on your way." The next few months brought remarkable changes to his life. He started calling his parents every Sunday without fail. He visited them once a month, sometimes bringing and her family along. His mother and became fast friends, bonding over their shared concern for and their love of cooking. Also began to change how he ran his businesses. He promoted people he had been overlooking, giving them opportunities to lead. He started a foundation to help young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, remembering what it was like to have nothing but dreams. And he began mentoring young business people, teaching them not just about success, but about balance and staying connected to what mattered. But the biggest change was in his home. The cold, sterile penthouse slowly transformed into a place of warmth and life, convinced him to add some color to the walls, to buy furniture that was comfortable rather than just expensive. They started a tradition of Sunday dinners where would bring her family, and sometimes would invite colleagues who had become actual friends rather than just business contacts. One evening, about 6 months after that first dinner with his family, was hosting a small gathering. His parents had come to visit, his children and were there, and a few of his friends from work. The penthouse was filled with laughter and conversation, with the smell of good food and the warmth of human connection. Stood in his kitchen, watching everyone interact. His mother was showing little Joshua how to frost cupcakes. His father was deep in conversation with son-in-law about baseball, was laughing with one of his colleagues, sharing stories that had everyone around her smiling. "You look happy, son," his father said, coming to stand beside him. "I am," said, and he realized it was true. For the first time in his adult life, he was genuinely, deeply happy. "I have everything I need right here." His father put his arm around his shoulders. "Your mother and I are so proud of you, not because of your money or your success, but because you finally found your way home. And I don't mean to Ohio, I mean you found your way back to yourself." Felt tears in his eyes, but he did not try to hide them. He had learned that tears were not weakness. They were proof that you were alive, that you cared, that you were human. Caught his eye from across the room and raised her glass in a silent toast. Raised his own glass back, mouthing the words, "Thank you." She smiled and nodded, understanding everything he could not say. But not everything was perfect. Transformation did not sit well with everyone in his life. Some of his business partners complained that he was not as aggressive as he used to be. Some of his old friends from the corporate world drifted away, unable to relate to this new version of who actually cared about people. And then there was Richard Blackwood. Richard was his main business rival, a man who had built his own empire through ruthless tactics and cutthroat deals. They had been competing for years, always trying to outdo each other, but had always stayed just ahead, always been just a little bit better. Recently, though, had started pulling back from some of the more aggressive business practices. He had passed on deals that would have made millions but would have hurt smaller companies. He had refused to participate in hostile takeovers that would have cost people their jobs, and Richard had noticed. One day, received a call from Richard. "We need to meet," Richard said, his voice cold. "There are some things we need to discuss about the Henderson merger." The Henderson merger was a major deal that both and Richard had been pursuing. It would be worth hundreds of millions to whoever secured it. Had been negotiating carefully, building relationships with the Henderson family, showing them how a partnership with his company would benefit everyone involved. Richard, on the other hand, had been trying to force the issue, using every trick in the book to pressure the Hendersons into choosing him. Agreed to meet Richard at a high-end restaurant downtown. When he arrived, Richard was already there, sitting at a corner table with a predatory smile on his face. Richard said, standing to shake hands, "You're looking well, different somehow. Have you been on vacation?" "Something like that," said, sitting down. "What did you want to discuss?" Richard leaned back in his chair, studying. "I want to know what your game is with the Henderson deal. You've been stalling for weeks now. In the old days, you would have closed this already. What's changed?" "I'm not stalling," said calmly. "I'm being thorough. The Hendersons are a family business. They care about what happens to their employees, their legacy. I'm showing them that I care about those things too." Richard laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Since when do you care about employees and legacy? You're Wellington. You eat companies for breakfast and don't think twice about it. What's really going on? Are you sick, having some kind of crisis?" Felt a flash of his old anger, the instinct to lash out and put Richard in his place. But then he thought about her calm wisdom and her gentle strength. He thought about his parents, about little Joshua, about all the people who had shown him what really mattered. "I'm not having a crisis," said quietly. I'm having an awakening. I realize that there's more to life than winning every deal, crushing every competitor, making every dollar possible. I realize that I want to build something that matters, something that helps people rather than just making me richer. Richard stared at him in disbelief. You're joking, he said flatly. This is some kind of negotiating tactic. It's not, said. I mean every word, and I'm going to win the Henderson deal, not because I'm more ruthless than you, but because I actually care about what they care about. The old me would have done whatever it took to win. The new me wants to win in a way that everyone benefits. Richard's face hardened. You've gone soft, he said with contempt. You're weak, and in this world, weakness gets you destroyed. I'm going to take the Henderson deal, and I'm going to take everything else you're working on. By the time I'm done, you'll regret the day you decided to grow a conscience. Stood up looking down at Richard with something like pity. You know what, Richard? I actually feel sorry for you because I used to be exactly like you. Angry, driven, convinced that the only way to be strong was to crush everyone around me. But I was wrong, and I was miserable. Real strength is being kind when you could be cruel. Real power is lifting others up instead of tearing them down. I hope you figure that out before it's too late. He walked away, leaving Richard sitting there with his threats and his bitterness, and felt lighter than he had in years. He did not need to prove anything to Richard Blackwood or anyone else. He knew who he was now, and that was enough. When got home, took one look at his face and asked what happened. He told her about the meeting with Richard, about the threats and the contempt. And then he told her about what he had said, about standing up for his new values even though it might cost him. His eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I'm so proud of you, Mr. Wellington, she said. That took real courage. I learned it from you, said simply. You showed me that there's a different way to live, a better way. Reached out and squeezed his hand. You did the hard work of changing. I just pointed you in the right direction. Over the next few weeks, Richard made good on his threats. He launched aggressive campaigns against several of his business interests. He spread rumors, poached clients, did everything he could to damage his reputation. Some of his board members were panicking, urging him to fight back with the same ruthless tactics. The pressure on continued to build. Richard Blackwood was relentless in his attacks, and some days it felt like everything had built was crumbling around him. He lost 2 major clients, and his stock price dropped 15% in a single week. The business news outlets were running stories about his decline, speculating that he had lost his edge. Through it all was there. On the nights when came home exhausted and discouraged, she would have dinner ready and a listening ear. She never told him what to do, never judged him for his struggles. She simply reminded him of why he had chosen this path, of the person he was becoming. Change is never easy, told him one particularly difficult evening. If it was easy, everyone would do it. But you're doing something important. You're proving that you can be successful without losing your soul. That matters more than any deal or any amount of money. Held on to her words during the dark days. And slowly, gradually, things began to turn around. The Henderson family, impressed by his integrity and genuine concern for their legacy, chose to partner with his company instead of Richard's. It was a huge validation of his new approach, and it sent a message to the business world that ethics and success could coexist. Other clients began to take notice. Companies that valued long-term relationships over short-term profits started reaching out too. Young entrepreneurs who wanted to build businesses with purpose sought his mentorship. And so employees, seeing the changes in their leader, became more engaged and productive than ever before. The foundation had started to help underprivileged entrepreneurs began to show real results. The first group of young business people he had funded were launching their own companies, creating jobs, and giving back to their communities. One of them, a young woman named Jasmine who had grown up in the same kind of poverty, had escaped, sent him a letter that made him cry. You believed in me when no one else did, she wrote. You saw potential in me that I didn't even see in myself. Because of you, I'm building something that will help other people like us. Thank you for showing me that success and compassion can go together. Framed that letter and hung it in his office. It reminded him why the struggle was worth it. But the biggest test was still to come. 6 months after his confrontation with Richard, he received a call from a major investment firm. They wanted to buy his company for an astronomical sum, over $5 billion. It was the kind of deal he had dreamed about his entire career. He would be set for life, his parents would never have to worry about money again, and he could retire young and do whatever he wanted. There was just one catch. The investment firm planned to gut the company, fire most of the employees, and strip it for parts. They saw it as a collection of valuable assets, not as a living organization with real people depending on it. Sat in his office, staring at the offer. $5 billion, financial security beyond his wildest dreams. But at what cost? He thought about the employees who had supported him through the difficult transition. He thought about the young entrepreneurs his foundation was helping. He thought about the legacy he was building, one based on values rather than just profit. He knew what the old would have done. The old would have taken the money without a second thought, convinced that he owed nothing to anyone and that business was just business. But he was not that person anymore. Called, it was late at night, and he knew she would probably be in bed, but he needed her wisdom. She answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the hour. "Mr. Wellington, is everything all right?" "I got an offer to sell the company," said. $5 billion, but they want to destroy everything we've built. Fire all the people who depend on us. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to take the money and walk away. But another part of me knows that would be betraying everything I've learned, everything I've become. Was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke and her voice was filled with gentle understanding. "Only you can make this decision, Mr. Wellington, but I'll tell you what I think. Money comes and goes. You can always make more money. But your integrity, your values, your word to the people who trusted you, once you sell those, you can never get them back. You have to decide what kind of man you want to be. The kind who takes the easy money, or the kind who stands by his principles even when it costs him." Closed his eyes, and in that moment he knew what he had to do. "Thank you," he said. "I needed to hear that." "You already knew it," said warmly. "You just needed permission to trust yourself." The next morning called the investment firm and turned down their offer. The executives were stunned. They raised their offer by another $1 billion, still said no. They asked him what it would take and told them the truth. "There is no amount of money that would make me sell out the people who depend on me," he said. "This company is not just an asset, it's a community, and I'm not interested in being the richest man in the graveyard. I'm interested in building something that outlasts me, something that actually matters." The news of his decision spread quickly through the business world. Some people called him a fool for turning down $6 billion, but many more called him a hero. His employees, when they learned what he had done, gave him a standing ovation at the next company meeting. Several of them had tears in their eyes. Richard Blackwood heard about the decision too. He called, and for once there was no hostility in his voice, just confusion. "I don't understand you, Wellington," Richard said. "You turned down $6 billion. Why?" "Because I finally learned what's worth more than money," said. "People, purpose, peace of mind. I spent so many years chasing wealth, thinking it would make me happy, but I was miserable. Now I have less money than I could have had, but I'm actually happy. That's priceless." Richard was silent for a long time. "Maybe you're not as weak as I thought," he said finally. "Maybe you're just different. I'm not sure I could do what you did." "You could," said. "It's just a choice, a hard choice, but still a choice. It's never too late to change, Richard." After he hung up, sat in his office and felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced the ultimate test and stayed true to his values. He had chosen people over profit, integrity over wealth, and he felt richer for it than any amount of money could make him feel. That evening came home to find his penthouse filled with people, had organized a surprise celebration. His parents were there, his entire family, and many of his employees who had become genuine friends. There was food and laughter and joy, and stood in the middle of it all, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. "Speech," someone called out, and soon everyone was chanting for to say something. Held up his hands, and the room quieted. He looked around at all the faces, at all the people who had helped him become the man he was today. "A year ago," said, his voice thick with emotion, "I had more money but less life. I lived in this beautiful penthouse, but it was cold and empty. I had success, but I had no one to share it with, and then came into my life." He looked at who was standing near the kitchen with tears in her eyes. "You changed everything. You saw me when I was lost and helped me find my way home. You taught me that wealth is not measured in dollars but in relationships. You showed me that being strong means being kind, that being successful means lifting others up. You saved my life, not by doing anything dramatic, but by simply caring when no one else did." Wiped her eyes, smiling through her tears. His mother put her arm around his shoulders, and the two women stood together, united in their love for this man who had finally learned how to be human again. So I want to thank all of you, continued. My parents for never giving up on me even when I gave up on myself. Family for welcoming me and showing me what real love looks like. My colleagues and employees for believing in a different kind of business, one built on values and not just profit. You all made me better. You all helped me understand what truly matters. He raised his glass. Here's to second chances. Here's to having the courage to change. And here's to the people who love us enough to tell us the truth, even when it's hard to hear. Everyone raised their glasses, and the room filled with cheers and applause. Caught's eye again, and she nodded at him with pride and affection. In that moment, understood something profound. He had spent his whole life trying to prove that he was worthy, trying to earn love through achievement and success. But had shown him that he was worthy simply because he existed, because he was human, because he mattered. After the party ended and everyone had gone home except who was cleaning up despite protests, they sat together in the quiet penthouse. The city lights twinkled outside the windows, but for once was not looking at the view. He was looking at this remarkable woman who had changed his entire life. I have something I want to ask you, said, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. Put down the dish she was washing and gave him her full attention. What is it? I want to make you a partner in my foundation, said. Not as an employee, but as an equal partner. You have wisdom and compassion that I could never match. Together, we could help so many more people. We could change lives the way you changed mine. His eyes widened. Mr. Wellington, I don't know anything about running a foundation. I'm just a housekeeper. You're not just anything, said firmly. You're one of the people I've ever met. You understand people in a way I never could. You see what they need, what they're struggling with. That's exactly what the foundation needs. Please say yes. Was quiet for a long moment and could see her thinking it through. Then slowly she smiled. On one condition, she said. Anything, said. You stop calling yourself Mr. Wellington and I stop calling you Mr. Wellington. We're partners now, friends. You call me and I'll call you. Felt his throat tighten. It was such a simple thing, but it represented everything he had learned. Letting go of the titles and the distance, accepting that he was just a person connecting with another person. No hierarchy, no walls, just two human beings working together to make the world a little bit better. Deal, said, and he held out his hand. Took it and they shook on it, sealing their partnership and their friendship. Over the next year and worked together to expand the foundation. They helped hundreds of young entrepreneurs get their start. They funded education programs in communities. They created mentorship opportunities that connected successful business people with those just starting out. And every decision they made together with compassion balancing business acumen. His relationship with his parents grew stronger. He visited them every month without fail, and they came to New York regularly to see him and his mother and became inseparable friends, cooking together and sharing stories about the man they both loved and worried about. Richard Blackwood eventually reached out to again, not as a rival but as someone genuinely interested in learning. He admitted that watching's transformation had made him question his own choices. They had coffee and shared his story honestly, including all the mistakes and struggles. He did not know if Richard would change, but he had planted a seed, and that was enough. The business continued to thrive, but in a different way than before. Was no longer the richest man in his industry, but he was arguably the most respected. Other business leaders started coming to him for advice on how to build companies with values. He became known as someone who had proven that you could be successful without sacrificing your soul. And through it all was there. Not as a housekeeper anymore, though she still loved to cook for and occasionally cleaned his penthouse just because she enjoyed it. But as a true friend, a partner, a guiding light who had shown him the way home. One evening, exactly 2 years after had first walked into his life, and blocked him from entering his own house in the metaphorical sense by refusing to let him continue living his isolated existence. They sat together on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Do you ever regret it? Asked, turning down all that money, changing your whole life? Thought about the question seriously. He thought about the $5 billion he had turned down, about the ruthless businessman he used to be, about the lonely penthouse and the empty success. Not for a second, he said honestly. I have less money now than I could have had, but I'm richer in every way that matters. I have people I love and who love me. I have purpose beyond just making more money. I have peace. That's worth more than any amount of wealth. Smiled and nodded. That's what I hoped you would say, because that's the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Being rich is about money. Being wealthy is about having a life worth living. Looked at this woman who had saved him without even trying, who had seen him at his worst and believed he could be better. And he understood that the greatest gift anyone could ever receive was not money or success or power. It was the gift of being seen, truly seen, by another human being who cared enough to tell you the truth. Thank you, said softly, for everything, for not giving up on me, for showing me a better way. You did the work, said, patting his hand. I just held up a mirror so you could see yourself clearly. You were always capable of being this person. You just needed someone to believe in you. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun continued to set, painting their world in warm golden light, and thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how a chance encounter with a housekeeper could change everything, how the greatest wealth was not in his bank account, but in the people sitting around his table, how sometimes the person who blocks you from continuing down the wrong path is actually the person who saves your life. In the end, the black maid who had blocked Wellington from entering his house that first day had not really blocked him at all. She had opened a door to a life he did not even know he wanted. A life filled with love and purpose and genuine human connection. A life where success meant something more than just numbers on a screen. And that, realized, was the greatest gift anyone could ever receive. But refused. Instead, he doubled down on his new approach. He was transparent with his clients about the challenges they were facing. He was honest with his employees about the uncertainty, and he focused on doing good work, on building real relationships, on proving through actions rather than words that his company stood for something meaningful, filling in the years that had passed. They talked for over an hour. His mother told him about her garden, about the neighbors, about small-town life, told her about his work, leaving out the parts about stress and loneliness. And when they hung up, his mother made him promise to call again soon. Promised, and this time he meant it. She left and was alone in his penthouse once again. He stood there in the silence, breathing hard, feeling the weight of his own anger pressing down on him. But underneath the anger was something else, something that felt uncomfortably like shame.